doesn't know that that method exists because you're using such a generic type. So you could either cast it later, as you'll see commonly, or in this case, you can just be more explicit up front. But it's not strictly necessary to do that if you especially want multiple UI widgets to call the same method. Now, what happened here? Well, self.text field resign first responder. So resign first responder does what functionally? Hides the keyboard, right? It says, I'm done responding to this previous interaction. What's my default behavior? According to the documentation, it drops the keyboard. And self.text field. So self is the self-referential sort of pointer that refers to the current object. And just to be clear, what type is this object? Where are we? This is main view controller. So the object in question is a main view controller object, and self.text field. So back in C, a dot signified accessing a struct field, but it's not a struct field here. What is it actually? Self.text field, yeah. Sorry? It's a property. So a property that's backed, so to speak, by an instance variable. But the dot notation here is an Objective-C thing that introduces the ability to invoke a property. But what does it mean to invoke a property? Well, what method is actually called when I say self.text field? Close. So it's not conventionally called getTextField. It would instead be called just textField. So this would be functionally equivalent. So self passes the message text field, and assuming there is indeed a getter that exists called text field, what will I get back? I'll get it back a pointer to the text field. And why then do we not just write it like this all over the place? It's just ugly, right? I mean, there's that. And by using properties, we also get a very compelling feature from the synthesize keyword, which is what? Exactly. You just get these automatically generated getters and setters. They don't appear in your actual code, but the compiler does implement them for you, so you don't have to write a whole bunch of annoying, tedious boilerplate code. And if you did do, if you know Java or did APCS or any intensive Java programming class, frankly, it just gets incredibly tedious to copy and paste all of these damn getters and setters for all of your classes. So this is a nice marginal add. So lastly, this just does the alerting. So NSString, I'm just constructing a string with a format. So this is very reminiscent of printf. Realize again that self.textField is a text field object. It's a UI text field object, but we actually want the .text property, which gives us back what data type probably? An NSString. And you can infer that because it's being plugged into this placeholder here. And then lastly, this very long named method, init with title, message, delegate, cancel button titles, other button titles, is simply the method that generates a UI alert view and initializes a UI alert view object. And then the show message, which is down here, is how we actually say show yourself. And it dismisses itself once you actually click the button. So any questions on where we then left off last time? All right, then one question about this. This was, recall I made a mistake when looking at this earlier, and I'd written nil instead of self, and the result was that the demo didn't work correctly. So what does it mean to be a delegate in general? This is an incredibly common design pattern in iOS and in GUI programming generally. Or if you're not quite sure how to express it, why are we passing in a pointer to myself to this alert view object? Yeah?
So the alert view knows what's supposed to handle when interaction happens.
Yeah, exactly. So there's asynchronous interactions here, right? When the UI alert view pops up, it's not going to go away instantaneously because the human has to actually see it. Well, the human might be slow, might need to take a moment to read it, might not be paying attention. And so this little UI alert view, the little JavaScript style alert window, is just going to stay there. Well, it would kind of suck if the whole application ground to a halt, especially if it were like a video or a game or your email inbox where you want stuff to be happening in the background. But if this were a blocking call showing a UI alert view object such that nothing else could happen until the user hits the OK button, it would be a pretty crappy user experience, right? And this is what life used to be like 10 years ago when you didn't have multi-threaded applications. But by passing in this pointer to self, I'm effectively informing this alert view object, by the way, when the user is done with you, as by pressing the button, let me know. And so delegation is all about providing pointers to an object, passing a pointer to some object so that the receiver can then pass messages back to that without grinding everything to a halt by just waiting for the return value of something like show. In other words, show can return instantly, and then eventually when that user dismisses the alert view, I will be informed, I being the delegate. So what is actually called? Well, let's take a quick look at our H file. In the H file for view controller, all I did up here was declare last time this go method. But notice here, I put in angled brackets this keyword. And I know how to do that from just reading the documentation for how to use the UI alert view. But what do the angled brackets here denote? So this is a protocol. So that's saying that this class called main view controller implements this delegate, which means I implement 0 or more methods that are declared in that protocol. Protocols can have required methods or optional ones. So this is saying I am implementing all of the required methods, if any, and maybe some of the optional ones. Well, what is the one in question? Well, if we scroll up to the very top, this is the only method that I borrowed from the documentation for alert view interaction. It's called alert view did dismiss with button index, and it pretty much does what the name describes. When the UI alert view is dismissed by the user touching that button, this message is passed to the main view controller object. I'm given a pointer to the original alert view object that I instantiated, and I'm also given an integer, which is either 0 or 1 or 2, depending on how many buttons there were in that little pop-up, and then I can simply respond to that key press. And what I did rather anally was just clear out the text field itself so as to start this silly little game again. But I wanted to do that only when the user clicked the button, not instantly when the user originally clicked the go button. So any questions on this general paradigm of delegation? It's something you'll indeed need to be comfy with for Evil Hangman's implementation. If only because the flip side view controller that you get for free from the template is implemented using this exact same paradigm. So the flip side, when you click done, can inform the front side that in fact it should flip itself back around. Any questions? All right, so let's do a little something easy in, let's say, Spanish. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Xcode project, iOS. I'm clicking Cocoa Touch. Nope. I'm clicking Application, and then Single View Application. I'm going to go ahead and name this Hola1. We're going to uncheck unit test for today. I'm definitely going to leave automatic reference counting checked, as you should for the project. I'm going to go ahead and just save this onto the desktop for now, and I get a little canned application. What does this thing look like? Well, if we just rebuild it real fast with Command R, it's going to be an incredibly underwhelming application that just has a view and nothing else to it. So let's actually say something here to the user. Let me go ahead and quit the simulator. Let me open my only nib file. On the right-hand side, let me go ahead and drag a little label here. I can make sure everything's nicely centered over here, and then I'll center the text, and I will just say hello. But then I realized that if I want to be able to sell this not to just English speakers, I want to sell it to Spanish-speaking people as well, it'd be nice to internationalize this thing. Well, if your UI is entirely implemented in a nib, it's actually super simple. I can simply click on my nib file, click on the inspector over here, and scroll down to where it says localization on the right. And adding another language is literally going to be as simple as choosing, let's say, Spanish from this dropdown. Now notice that I have two locales here. And if I scroll back up, notice what happened to my nib file. So Xcode gave me just 2 files. So it's a little annoying in that now I have to somehow, if I make changes to one, I have to make changes to the other. But if your UI is relatively simple, as this one certainly is, my English one here looks the same. But if I now choose the Spanish one, I can go in here and say hola instead. Save this whole thing, and now notice English, Spanish, English, Spanish. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And because my little simulator is in English by default, I should say hello. And I indeed do. Now, if this demo works, I'm going to go ahead and click the home button, go back here to settings, go to general, international, change my language to Spanish. Done. It's going to reconfigure itself. It's adjusting the language. And now, Hola1 says hola. All right. Very fancy. Just doubled my revenues in the store. All right. So this is not all that scalable, though, because you're certainly not going to isolate all of your strings just to these nib files. So it's a quick and dirty way of internationalizing something if most of your text is actually in the UI. But suppose we want to do things a little more generally. I'm going to instead this time going to create another single view application. We'll go ahead and call it Hola 2 for version 2. Leave all the other defaults the same. And this time, what I'm going to do is still put a label in the middle here. So let me drag a label into the middle of my UI. I'm going to go ahead and center it as before, just in case one language's word is a little bigger than the other. This way it can grow to fill the whole width. I'm just going to leave it called label for the moment. But now in my code, I'm actually going to have, in my implementation of this thing, code that's programmatically going to change whatever word it is that I want to say.